Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. First of all, Happy New Year to the ones that already have had the new year. And I'm very pleased that so many people are here with us today and interested in this very important subject. My name is Oliver Bertschinger. I'm the Managing Director and President of SEC. SEC is the Chamber of Commerce for Switzerland, Central Eastern Europe, and I have the honor to host this webinar today. I'm doing this, of course, in the name of all 11 organizations that are behind this new format. You can see them here. So if you're in any of those countries or you're interested in these countries, please, these organizations are here to help you. We invented this format, the Swiss Impulse Session, to provide people like yourselves who are in the intersection between Switzerland and Central Eastern Europe once a month with a very short, inspiring insights about the subject that matters to you. And I think today we have a good example of this. Now, before we start with the webinar and with Christian, I just wanted to give you a few technicalities. We want, as usual, this to be an interactive session. So Christian will talk about 25 to 30 minutes. If you have any questions during his speech, please use the Q&A button at the bottom and write your questions. You are on mute for the whole time. If you have anything interesting to add, use the chat function. Maybe you know a book or a fact that is interesting for the rest. Please be active using this. And we will end this session precisely at 11:45. Usually we go on a little bit longer, but for the ones who have to leave, we will finish this on time. You will receive the slides of Christian, and we will also post the video on YouTube, so you can watch it afterwards once again. Good. So let me introduce our speaker today. Dr. Christian Schaffner is the Executive Director of the Energy Science Center of ETH Zurich in Switzerland. ETH, of course, being ranked as the number 6 university globally and as the number 1 university in Europe if you ask the World University Rankings 2020. So we are very proud about that ETH is such a top school right here in Zurich. So we are extremely pleased that Christian has agreed to talk to us about such a pressing problem as how the world can actually solve the energy problem in the future. Christian already studied at ETH, receiving his degree in electrical engineering and his PhD degree in electric power systems at the ETH. He then went on to work for the Swiss Federal Office of Energy before he started 2013 in his current role as Executive Director. So Christian truly is a profound energy specialist, bundling all the know-how of ETH, and we are very curious to hear what you have to tell us today, Christian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for this very kind introduction. You have seen the title of today's talk. Maybe it's a little bit too promising, because I think I cannot tell you exactly how to solve the problem. I think there are many variables there, but at least I can maybe give you my thoughts on where we should be heading or where we can be heading and what could be helping to solve this issue. So let me say a few words before I start about the Energy Science Center at ETH. So you know a little bit where I'm working. My job at ETH Zurich is really to bring together the experts, and these are about 60 professors that are working in 9 different departments at ETH in the energy field, to bring together these experts and tackle common issues, common challenges in the energy field. So we work really at the area where interdisciplinarity is key, where we solve systemic issues that are not easily solvable by one single professorship, by one single group, but really work together. For example, the economists working with the engineers, or the architects working with other social scientists, or all together. So this is really our goal, and that's also a few of the results I'm showing today are coming from these very broad collaborations that we foster at ETH. So yes, some people said my role is comparable to a diplomat, really trying to bring people together, trying to bring people to talk together, and at the end also work together. And that's of course also something I hope I can do today. I'm very much inviting you all to also approach me after this talk if you have areas where you think we could or should work together, be it directly with you or be it with a university at your country. So let me start. I will start sharing my screen as well. And I would like to start this presentation by going a little bit into the past, because I think it's also always interesting to look at the past and understand what happened in the energy supply, and then look into the future. And I will do that first looking at Switzerland, because it's also one idea is that to let you know a little bit what's happening in Switzerland or what has happened, but then also broaden the scope to Europe, and then at the end with a few topics that I think we all should try to tackle in the next coming decades. So let me go back to the past. What you see here is the final energy consumption of Switzerland starting in 1910 and ending when I think it's 2019 or 2020, excuse me. That's the last year that we have the data here. And what you see is the final energy consumption, as I said. And at the bottom, you have wood, then you have coal a little bit here, you have industrial waste, then we have fuels for heating, so really in the building sector. Then you have mobility here, so these are gasoline cars, and then you have natural gas here in the dark blue, you have electricity, the lighter blue, and then you have distant heat. And at the top, we have so-called other renewables. So basically that's wind and PV, in Switzerland, mainly PV, and a little bit of biofuels, etc. Okay, so what is interesting when we look at this graph is that this was not a linear development in the last 100 years. It was really a development that had a couple of bifurcation times. And the first one you can immediately see, of course, is here, the Second World War, and after the Second World War. We have suddenly a completely changed dynamic in the system. We have an almost exponential increase in fuels for heating. So it basically means that we have started to have heating in houses that are not coal-based anymore. You see the coal going down here after the 60s. And so this was an immense increase here, but also mobility, of course, started to increase heavily. Electricity also increased, but not as much as the other sectors. And then we have a second point here. That's in the 70s, 74. Some of you might still know that the oil crisis in the whole world, right? And then suddenly we have again like a time where this almost exponential increase in energy demand in the building sector changed within a couple of years. And I think that's also very interesting. It didn't take decades. It really took only a couple of years. It changed from an exponential growth into a decline. And this decline, this is more or less linear. It's still going on. So we're using less and less energy in the building sector, while at the same time increasing the number of people living in Switzerland. So this is actually a very important success story. Whereas in the mobility sector, this area here, we didn't really decrease that much. So actually consumption for fuel was even increased. even though we have much more efficient engines today, but that's, you know, this story. And of course, like 2020, we have a quite sharp decline here. It's not shown. Yes. So I think it's very interesting to see that the energy supply system is not by any means stable over decades. It can change quite quickly. And it has changed a couple of times. And the question, of course, is, are we again at such a point now in these years? What is important to see for Switzerland is that all this part here, so we really, if you take all the fossil fuels and natural gas together, all this is imported into Switzerland. So we don't have any natural resources in energy in Switzerland except hydropower, right, which is going into electricity, photovoltaics, obviously, and some biomass, etc., and a little bit of wood here. But all the rest is really imported. And if you take even nuclear fuels into the equation here, about 80% of our energy is imported in Switzerland. And this is a challenge. And the other challenge, obviously, is how to reduce the fossil fuels, because we want to get to a net zero society. And this brings me to the next slide, which shows a scenario how to reach a net zero greenhouse gas scenario for Switzerland. And I think it's important to see, because at the end, it's not so much different for most European countries. Obviously, the categories are a little bit different here, and we'll get to that. But in general, the general trends are very similar. So what you see here is 1990 and 2000 and 2018. So these are measured data in megatons of CO2 equivalents emitted in different sectors. So what you have here at the bottom is our processes, industry processes. Then you have the energy conversion industry, other industry, mobility sector here. Then services, which is, by the way, also mostly buildings and heating and cooling. And then you have households, so the private households. Then you have the agriculture on the top, some evaporation from also processes and waste. And what you see in this graph, that already from 1990 to 2080, we were able to reduce CO2 emissions quite significantly. It happened mainly in the building sector here. It didn't happen that much in the mobility sector, and also the others remain more or less similar. Industry is some reductions there, but it has also to do with industry that is no longer existing in Switzerland. But to get to 2050, a net zero scenario, this is still very challenging. And excuse me, that was the wrong button. And just a few examples here. If you look at the building sector, heating and cooling, we have to get to a almost completely zero emission scenario. So we can have no more emissions in heating whatsoever. Basically meaning no gas heating, no oil heating, no coal, nothing. In the mobility sector, more or less the same thing. So basically no diesel cars, no gasoline cars, just basically electric cars, right? It's very simple. And then we have other areas like industry processes where we also need to go to well, industry as a whole, not industry processes, where we have to basically get to zero. And still then we will have some emissions coming from agriculture, coming from conversion processes, a little bit coming from other industrial processes and energy conversion. And for these to get to net zero, we need to deploy negative emission technologies. So we need to either capture CO2 from the air or use other technologies to capture CO2 and store it on the ground. And also this is a challenge that is not yet 100% solved there. So you see in this graph, even though we have been reduced quite a bit, it's still hugely a huge challenge to get to these results. So let me now go to Europe. I just downloaded this data from IEA yesterday and made a similar graph. And if you took whole Europe, so this is really including not only the European Union, but really the whole Europe, the countries in Europe, you see the energy supply now from 1990 to 2019 And of course, here you also see that we have coal at the bottom, then oil, basically, of course, for cars at the end, and heating, natural gas. So all this part here is also fossil-based. This is not imported if you take Europe, or only partly imported, but it's still fossil-based. So we see a reduction here, the trend at least, but this trend has been over 30 years, and until 2050 you have another 30 years. So basically this slow trend needs to drastically accelerate to even like remotely get to net zero by 2050. Then on top of, we have nuclear, which is of course one big question. How does it, will it stay like this? Will it increase or will it decrease? We have hydropower that can maybe be increased a little bit. And then we have all the new renewables that have to be increased significantly, because typically biofuels and bio mass energy is more or less already exploited. It can increase maybe a little bit. So the big area we really can increase is wind and solar, basically. So again, here, if you just look at this number, it's pretty straightforward what has to be done, but it's a huge challenge. This is clear. Now, what we do at ETH, we look at energy system models where we try to see, especially with a focus on electricity, because the big challenge is really in electricity. We will have to have heat pumps, etc. We'll need e-mobility, and this all like then ends up in the electricity system. So we really see the big challenge there. And so we need to find systems that also work from a system perspective. So the whole grid has to work, the whole energy system has to work. And for this, we developed energy system modeling platform that we call Nexus E. There's also a webpage for nexuse.org. There we try to really model the whole energy system with a focus on electricity by doing looking at the centralized systems, so meaning big units like hydropower or nuclear power stations, but then also interacting with the decentralized system, because in the future PV, especially PV, will be mostly decentralized, not only, but mostly. And so we need to understand this interaction between the central system and decentralized system. We need to understand the electricity market, the grid security, to understand will we have blackouts or not, basically. And then also do a macroeconomic assessment to actually understand, is this even feasible? What are the impacts on GDP, etc. And this is then feed back into the electricity system optimization. So we have this integrated assessment of the energy system. And as input, we have the grids, we have the existing generators, we have generator and fuel costs, we have the weather data, etc. And some policy measures, obviously, like how much which technologies are being subsidized, how much we have there, CO2 tax, etc. And as output, what we get is then the newly installed capacities, the distribution, the electricity generation, electricity prices, import exports, etc. And really also understand, will we expect outages, demand not served, etc. And also how the electricity grid can be improved. And what we did in the first case studies, we really looked at Switzerland, but all the surrounding countries involved. This is really a case study. And here are some results in the reference scenario where we went from today here on the right side to 2050. And what you see is that we exit nuclear power. This is something that has been decided by the Swiss people as well. And we invest heavily in photovoltaics. So this is basically the short story. There is also some batteries that are coming into play. There is some demand side management at the top. I'm sorry, this has not been translated. That was actually planned. I don't know, somehow I took maybe the wrong slides here, but anyhow, I can do that later. And there are some imports, especially in the time from 2040 to 2050. But this is only looking at the overall year. You can also go then to monthly analysis, and you see that in winter we are importing, in summer we are exporting, And this basically stays the same also in the future. So already today, we're importing in Switzerland quite heavily in winter and exporting quite heavily in summer. This kind of like system will also stay like this until 2050. But if you look at the years, you will see some differences. And there are a couple of things that are quite interesting, and looking at the time, I will skip a few things, but show you a few examples of how we can look at these problems. And we can look at different scenarios. And I think this is what such a platform really makes it interesting, because we can really model different scenarios and see the differences. And what we did, for example, is we look at overcapacities in renewables in neighboring countries. So we assume that Germany, France, Italy, they really invest heavily in photovoltaics, more than the typical scenarios say today, more than the TYNTP, so the 10-year network development plan of Nexus E says. And then we see what happens in Switzerland. And we can then really see that when we have overcapacities in the surrounding countries, then in Switzerland, it actually becomes more effective to build additional cost-efficient flexible units, mainly gas-powered units, and you see them here in black. So suddenly in Switzerland, it becomes only economically, so it's nothing about politics, it becomes interesting to install gas units. And they really provide flexibility for the surrounding countries. And PV is maybe a little bit less interesting. And another scenario we looked at is if the surrounding countries have a lot of gas units and instead don't really install into renewables as much as in the other scenario, it's the opposite, right? Then suddenly in Switzerland we would see a lot more PV. And I mean, we can go talk a lot about these scenarios, but the important message here is really that you have to look at all these issues, not just from one country, but really taking together the whole European system. Otherwise, you will not end up with really good answers. And instead of talking too much about these graphs, I also wanted to show you a live demo of results viewer that we have from these results, and you can actually do that yourself as well. So let me just show you the screen there. Just a second. So you should see now some results that are actually not yet published. They are really very new, basically have been done 2 weeks ago, where we looked at the effect of different load patterns in the future. So you all know if we have much more electric mobility in the system, we will have a completely different charging pattern or load pattern in the electricity supply. So we will see more in the evening, but we also will have intelligent systems coming up that try to shift the loading times. And we also added assumptions on heat pumps. So we will have more electricity demand in winter. And what you see here is the comparison of the base results on the left, and then these additional assumptions on the right. And we look at it from a yearly point of view. So 2020 to 2050, you see that the difference left and right is not that big. It's actually very similar. And then you could say, okay, maybe it's not a big problem. But then when you go into monthly view, you already see that we have quite some differences, that you have imports that are different, that are heavier in certain months than on the left, but still it's not very different. So you could still think, okay, maybe the system doesn't change that much. Only if you go to hourly, and this will now take a while to load all the data into the viewer, only if you go then into the details and look at how 2050 looks like, you will see differences. And already from today to 2050, but also within 2050. And you have here on the left a typical week in May. So you see in yellow the PV, you see in blue the run-of-river plants, you see in lighter blue the dams, so the hydropower dams. And you see in red the so-called net load. So this is the load, the black load, minus all the production that we cannot control, so minus PV, etc. And you see that over the days, it goes from negative to positive and back again. So this is the scenario if we just would assume similar load patterns that we have today. If you assume other load patterns, as we see on the right, where we shift the load really into the times where we have a lot of PV, and this is feasible with demand side management, but also with batteries and many other things, you see that this net load does not get as much into the negative side as here. And this is really where we see the differences. So first, we will see a very dynamic system. So everything that brings in has a dynamic capabilities like gas-fired units is actually quite interesting. And second, we also see that the system, how it works, will be very different depending on how we control our loads, how we bring intelligence into the system. Anyhow, I mean, this is just a very short glimpse into what we are doing here. So I will stop this now, and I'm happy, of course, to answer questions and go back actually to my presentation. Just a second. And come already to my conclusions. Since I said I should talk about 25 minutes, so we are almost there. And for me, of course, there can be many conclusions, but I try to boil it down to 6 points. And the first is that I basically already said at the beginning. I think we're really again at such a point where the energy systems change dramatically. And it's very clear that the future will be quite different. And it also will be much more complex. Just consider that 10 years, maybe, 10 years ago, we had in Europe a couple of hundred production units that really, so it was hydro, it was nuclear, it was gas, and natural gas, etc. But it was basically a couple of hundred units that were producing electricity. Already today, but in the future even more, we will have millions of power units, be it PV, be it wind, be it biomass. So we will have a completely different system that has to work together. And so it will be much more complex. The other challenge is that we actually would need to decide today what we will have by 2050. So we have another 30 years to go, or not even 30 years, it's more 28 years, right? Time is running. But we need to decide today, do we invest in nuclear power? Do we invest in hydro? Do we invest in more gas? So all these things have to be decided today, or at least in the coming years. It's also clear that this doesn't work without big investments. And I mean, we have been preparing this lecture also a little bit with Olivier. I mean, if you, for example, if you look at nuclear power, these investments, there are bulk investments that are huge. But also, if you go to PV, the investments are big, huge, but of course not not in one lump sum, but really distributed. If you look more at the technical side, it's very clear that we need flexibility. And this is a challenge as well. And flexibility come from very different areas. It can come from batteries, and it's clear, I think, that we will have much more storage in form of batteries, but maybe also another form of storage in the future. It can come from gas-fired units. There, of course, you have the challenge. If you want to get to a net zero system, you need either CCS, carbon capture and sequestration / storage, or you need, which comes with its own challenges. For example, you need to store the CO2 somewhere, you might need to transport the CO2, meaning you might even need a CO2 grid in Europe. But there might be other challenges. And one thing to consider there definitely is that any unit that doesn't provide flexibility in the future might not be as valuable as it might seem today. Obviously, this is kind of forecasting in the future. Nobody knows the future, but at least we see this trend. So, for example, the question will be with, for example, nuclear power. Nuclear power typically does not provide flexibility or only very little flexibility. So what will be the value of nuclear power in the future? This is something that has to be carefully looked into before these investments are being done. And I think what also becomes clear, we need systems thinking. We cannot just think about one technology or one energy system. We really need to think about heating sector, mobility sector, other industry sector, and think how can they actually work together. And yes, I think it's also clear that we need to move forward together. And by together, I mean both within the countries, meaning like administration, politics, and industry, and also energy providers, but also internationally. It's very clear that the more we move into these complex systems that are mainly based on electrification, the closer the countries have to work together to make sure that the system is stable and safe in the future as well. And this by itself is a big challenge. So to sum up, there are really big challenges, and I mentioned quite a few of them, but there are also big opportunities by new technologies, having be it storage or be it flexibility providers. And also, I think, especially in the intelligent systems, I think there is a huge potential that we need in Europe. And I think that's also the interesting part, is also needed worldwide. So if we can show in Europe things that do work, I think, at least that's my assumption, there will be a big interest also worldwide. And with this, I would like to close. There are just a few names that are behind the system Nexus E that I was showing before. You see a couple of professors at the top that are involved, but then all researchers as well. And you also see that it's a truly joint effort within ETH, spanning 4 different departments that made this platform possible. You can also play with it yourself. It's all online. You have to register, but then you can also go into the details. With this, I would like to close. And yes, I'm open to questions. I see that there are already a few questions, but maybe Olivier, you had a look as well.
Yes, thank you, Christian, for these first thoughts. Incredibly difficult, complex, and maybe some people are expecting there's going to be this one, what I'm taking away, that there's not going to be this one innovation that will, be the solution, but actually it's a mix of innovation, but also the systemic approach and the intelligence that is needed within countries and internationally. So, Christian, maybe you can have a look at the 2 questions. One came fairly early about the electricity.
Yes.
That was the chart when you showed the electricity in Switzerland.
Yes. Okay, so yes, let me start with this question from Michael Ammann. From where is the electricity coming? Well, I mean, today, the electricity well, it always depends on which country you look at. But if you look at Europe, you know that nuclear power is playing an important part. And then in addition, we also have fossil fuels and hydropower, right? In Switzerland itself, we are in the lucky situation that our production side is based on nuclear and hydro mainly. There are a couple of others, meaning that our electricity production is quite low on CO2 emissions. However, it's very clear that we are not an island. So we import, as I said before, we import in winter, we export in summer. And so then it becomes difficult to say like how clean our electricity is. It depends a little bit on how you calculate it. But Europe-wide, the challenge is big. I mean, I showed also the overall consumption. And if you then want to look into the future, so where is the additional electricity coming from that will be needed? And it's clear that electrification of mobility and the electrification of building sector or heating will need additional electricity. So in Switzerland, we assume about 1/5 to 1/3 additional need in electricity. And so the question, where is this coming from? our models clearly, so our models, they are technology agnostic. We just put in different technologies that we might have, and then we tell the system, okay, please calculate the economically and technically the most viable solution for us. And then it's very clear that PV plays a very important role in Switzerland. If you look at overall Europe, it will be basically a combination of PV and wind. This is where the biggest addition will come from. And that really has to do with cost curves, that PV got so much cheaper, actually in a way that nobody assumed 10 years ago, that it really now becomes one of the cheapest ways to produce electricity. But of course, like as I said, when we have much more PV and wind, the system becomes very complex and it's not easy to solve. So I'm not saying that it's easy to be done, but at least what we see from our scenarios, it is possible. And it is possible with the potential that we have in Europe. So not some crazy ideas, but really with the potential, for example, in Switzerland, just taking the roofs that we have and adding PV there. So that was the question the answer to your question.
Maybe, Christian, when you say Europe, now when you look into Central Eastern Europe with and also Eastern Europe and other countries, now they're all, of course, not necessarily always at the same level in regards to, I don't know, maybe they're even better than Switzerland, but how do you see that? Is there are there problems that are actually, how do you see these differences between countries?
Yes. Well, I mean, one difference is definitely that the energy or the electricity supply in Eastern Europe is quite often quite heavily based on coal and gas, right? So there the challenge is bigger, obviously, right? There are not that many. Well, there basically no nuclear, right? But it's heavily based on coal and natural gas. And some also a little bit of oil. And of course, like moving to a net zero system there is much more challenging. And it's very clear that, of course, for example, CCS, carbon capture and storage, it is a solution, but it adds to the cost. So if you say, okay, let's just keep all units, with coal it's a little bit more difficult, but with gas, I mean, it's possible to add, at least technically, it's possible to add carbon capture and storage to gas-based units, but it will heavily add to the cost of this unit. So the question will be in the future, will these units become competitive against wind and PV? And this is really the question we have to answer. Nobody knows, right? But we can run scenarios. We can see, okay, where could be these points? And what we see is that coal, well, it heavily depends then also on the subsidy levels, right? Because even coal is subsidized sometimes in certain countries. And the question then really is, okay, where do we end up with these different price levels? And we haven't done these calculations for Eastern Europe in particular. We would be happy to do that if we could define a project together. I think that would be possible. But of course, it always quite a bit of work to get all the data. But I think that this is really the big difference. And then the other challenge, of course, like always, is the grid. Like, do the electricity grids are they potent enough, big enough, and capable enough to really then have these exchanges, these dynamic exchanges? Because you can do it country by country. Yes, that's possible, but also there it just becomes more expensive. The less you are interacting with surrounding countries, the more expensive it becomes. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. So we have 7 questions. So we have.
Yes. So shall I just start with go with the next one from Daniel Hauri? What should be done today, technology-wise and politically, for that energy is becoming more affordable? Let's say cheaper. Well, again, like it depends on if we mean energy in overall or electricity. Obviously, if you add, for example, CO2 tax, you will make fossil fuels or fossil energy more expensive. And this will add to the cost of electricity in the near future, at least. So their energy will be becoming more expensive overall. So this is also, I didn't show these graphs, but this is what we see in our modeling. Energy and electricity in particular will become more expensive. So it doesn't look like it's becoming cheaper. However, we have another trend, which is of course PV, that is becoming still becoming today cheaper. The question will be how low it will get. Some people are saying that we are kind of like reaching the lowest area there. This is difficult to predict. And also wind is becoming cheaper, storage is becoming cheaper. So there are both trends, right? One is obviously if you add CO2 tax, that will increase cost. Also gas prices in general, right? The question is how high will they stay in the future? And then I mean, the question was, well, what can we do? I think definitely what definitely helps, but that's my personal opinion, is letting the market play. And this, of course, works the better, the bigger the system is. So having a strong European interconnection does help, and really trying to get away from subsidies as much as possible, and really let the market work, since we do have these technologies now. And then, yes, I think I almost have to say this. I think there is also still a lot of work to be done in research and development. And really try to foster innovation there, being through startups, be it through venture capital coming into play. I think that's definitely another important thing. So I would say try to have a setup that allows for flexibility, allows for innovation. That's probably the most important. The next question, just continue on the list. From Ulrich Schwendimann, my question: what is the possible role of small and medium nuclear reactors to achieve the 2050 goals? That's a very interesting question. Me personally, I'm skeptical that we will have technology at scale. So not just demonstration units, or pilot and demonstration, or even research units by 2050. I mean, just the history of technology shows that technologies are never, they always take time, and especially take a lot of time to get them into the market. So nobody knows what the costs of small nuclear reactors will be in the future and how competitive they will be. But even if they will become competitive, and it's definitely possible, it will take time. So I'm a little bit looking at the timelines. Also, when you look at startups that are working in this area, they often have timelines of like 10, 15 years to even get to a pilot unit. And then it easily adds another 10, 15 years to actually bring them to the market afterwards. I mean, just looking at electric mobility, for example, that's also a technology that has been there for a long time, but only now it becomes really viable in the market. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but who knows? I mean, maybe we're lucky to get something earlier, but I think we cannot, it's basically, hopefully we get technologies that are good and safe and cheaper, but it will take time. And so we cannot just do nothing and wait for these technologies. We have to do all the rest as well. And then maybe we even get help from some technologies like this, but I wouldn't be too optimistic, because basically the technologies are here to solve this issue. We just have to do it. Then there's a question from Daniel. Do the increase of the electric cars in the next years, due to the increase, excuse me, of the electric cars in the next years, will this be challenging issue for the electricity supply? I mentioned it briefly. Yes, it will be a challenge. There is increased demand. There is also increased variability, because electric cars don't charge all the time the same. And what is really crucial is that we prepare for this now. And preparing means really having regulations that allow for smart ways of charging, so that we don't have everybody charging at the same time, that you really try to have it smooth it out through the day. We also need to invest in flexibility options, be it batteries, be it other flexibility. But our modeling shows that it's absolutely possible. So it's not an unsolvable challenge, but it needs investments, it needs time, and I think especially electric utilities, they need to really start thinking now what their strategy is there.
Okay, good. So Christian, it's a 11:45. Officially, I end this session. We have a lot of questions, so we might not be able to do all of them. But the ones who have to leave, we always end punctually. Thanks for having been with us today. Our next session will be on the 8th of February. The topic is being decided as we speak, so we will let you know. Thanks a lot, and I pass back to Christian, who kindly agreed to stay a bit longer, and the ones who want to stay, please, you're very welcome to do so. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for listening. And again, just send me an email if you have more questions, or also connect me over LinkedIn. And I will just continue answering the question. I have time. Yes, we have a question from Kaloyan. Have you made an analysis on scenarios when integrating more gas power plants through 2030, 2050, and having high dependencies on mainly one source of natural gas, Gazprom, the impact of that dependency on the price in the end? Okay. No, that's a simple question. We didn't do an analysis of the gas system. I mean, this is obviously one of the big open questions that are more than in the area of energy politics or politics, like how dependent are we on gas and gas imports? I mean, obviously moving to more PV and wind makes us less dependent, but not independent, right? So yes, I would say this is probably a message that should go to politics. I mean, the international relation there need to be maintained, and obviously trying to be more diverse, having more options, be it liquid natural gas or other options, does help. But again, like, this is a very political question, and yeah, I don't really, it's not really my field of expertise, so I can't say too much. Then we go to Vilmos. Are you in Switzerland calculating with total crashdown in the near future? Very good question. So there's a lot of discussion about blackouts, and what is important to understand is that there are different things we are talking about. One thing is really the classical blackout that happens very rarely. I mean, it happened about 10 years ago with Italy, and there was another incident more years before. So it really happens very seldom, and all the transmission system operators, it's one of their main jobs to avoid such a blackout. And a blackout can have many reasons. And typically it means that the system is not stable and the operators cannot stabilize it. And it typically, and I think this is the interesting part, it typically has not too much to do with lack of production. For example, the last blackout that we had with Italy, we had plenty of production units online at that time. It was not a problem of lacking production. It was a problem of lacking understanding of the system, of not having full information, of not reacting as they should have, looking back. So the message there is, what is important is really the coordination between the different countries. And the message to Switzerland is, we need to have a very good relation with the surrounding countries in order to be able to maintain this stability. Another thing is lack of production capacity in Europe. And there, first, the message is, typically when we in Switzerland have a problem, whole Europe has a problem, or vice versa. And that is basically true for almost every country in Switzerland, in Europe, excuse me. So when you're in the system, well, depending a little bit on how good you are interconnected with the surrounding countries, in Switzerland, we're very highly interconnected. So it really is a European-wide issue. Do we have enough production capacity by 2050 online in the system? And there, if we don't have enough, then we might end up with situations where we have to do load shedding. So a city like Zurich is offline for a couple of hours. And it's still not a blackout, right? This will then be just a load shedding. And obviously nobody wants this, and we're not running there. I mean, there are other countries in the world that do that, and we don't want to go there. So this is another issue. So yes, the challenges are there. The system is becoming more dynamic. So, but at the moment, it looks like we have it under control. And in the coming years, we need to think: do we need more flexible units, like for example a gas unit, to be able, in the case of emergency, to immediately react there? So this is a question, and there are many studies going on also in that area. So I hope not. It looks okay at the moment, but the challenges are there. Yes, so I just continue, and Olivier, you interrupt me, right? If you see a question that I should take up with priority, or when I should stop. So there's a question from Vanya. How about energy prices? Will there be an end to the current price increase in the future? I don't know. If I would know this, then I would be paid highly. So I cannot know this. We in our scenarios, we see a general trend to increase in energy prices, but not as much, obviously, as we have seen, for example, in gas in the recent years, and the recent months, excuse me. But as you know, there are many factors playing into the equation there, and they're not only technical; they're also political. So it's a difficult question to answer, and you probably better ask a political scientist than me. Yeah, I don't know. I hope. Typically, these systems stabilize over a longer period, but there can always be shorter periods where we see very high prices. And so I think we better prepare for these price fluctuations. And again, like PV and wind, they do help level this out a little bit, because their unit price, so their marginal prices are very low.
Christian, there's basically a lot of question about let's say the most promising technologies, like the next one, the hydrogen, blue, green. There's of course question if there is a way out without what I probably say wrong, the nuclear fusion approach, etc. So
okay, yes. So what I typically answer to these questions is, I think Olivier, you also mentioned it. There's no silver bullet somewhere. I don't see it, at least. I mean, nuclear fusion, if it ever comes, it might solve all the problems. Who knows? But we are very far away from this point. And again, like we're not even at well, maybe at the experimental scale we are, right? But we're far away from even pilot units. I mean, we just in these days there were articles about China wanting to go there. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, if it does work at one point and it does work safely, then it might solve a lot of problems. But to be honest, I don't see it in the time frame that we actually need to get rid of CO2 emissions. So it might help us solve issues that we have after 2050, 2060, going into 2100. But it's very unclear if, and it's very clear to me, at least, that it will not happen in the next 10, 20 years. So that's my opinion. If I'm right or wrong, we will see in 10, 20 years, right? And then the other thing is hydrogen. Hydrogen is interesting because there's a lot of political discussion about it. We do see it in certain areas. It might play a role in energy storage because it has the advantage that it can store energy over a very long time. Green hydrogen might play a role by providing the basis for synthetic fuels, but there we only really see it for aviation, because in the car business and trucks even, I think batteries are basically electric, and batteries are basically what happened and what will happen in the future. Blue hydrogen is something, but what you always have to consider is to produce either green hydrogen, so hydrogen from PV and wind basically, or blue hydrogen, where you use a natural gas and then use carbon capture and storage. You need a lot of energy to produce blue hydrogen, because all the carbon capture and storage actually needs energy as well. and you add to the cost there. And if you take that together, I'm also a little bit skeptical, to be honest, there, if this will really play a major role or not. And yeah, you also have to see that if we want to get to net zero, we need negative emission technologies. And for these, we need CCS, and we need, so the question is, will there even be enough CCS capacity? Because you always have to consider, you also need to store it. So you need the sink for CO2 sink. Will it be enough for having all the negative emissions that we need? And then on top of that, you would need to do blue hydrogen. So yeah, again, I'm not really an expert on this, but to be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical.
What about, Christian, you talked about this negative emission, like climate works. Are there technologies that you see that can actually, you know, be successful in the near future?
Right. So negative emission technologies, there are different ways of doing it. One is direct air capture. So that's what the ETH spin-off Climework has developed and it's deploying now. This technology, I actually see more into 20, 30 years, and it might play an important role, and it might be actually our only way out of this mess, if I might say this like this. But again, like direct air capture needs a lot of energy, so it's not free. And there are other ways of doing negative emission technologies that are, I would say, lower hanging fruits than direct air capture. So I'm saying like direct air capture might actually help, and it might be even interesting especially if you put it in an area where you have a CO2 sink. So for example, if you go to Iceland and you have a lot of energy in terms of heat, also Iceland. But there are also other ways. And one is, for example, if you look at waste incineration, what you can do is you can burn your waste, and roughly half, that's one assumption, is coming from biogenic sources, so wood or whatever. And if you then do CCS, you create negative emissions. So this is something that is feasible, and we are actually involved in a couple of projects where we look at this. And this is much less energy intensive than direct air capture. There are other ways of doing bioenergy CCS, so burning wood and then doing CCS using other biofuels. So there are a couple of technologies there, but it's also a big challenge, and it's not done. I mean, the potential is also limited. So I think we really have to think about where we use these kind of technologies. Where shall we continue?
Yeah, I think take 1, 2, or 3 quick answers to those questions. If we will also send Christian's email, if I may, to follow up.
Absolutely.
I think we talked about nuclear PSEs in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. There's 4 more questions now. Pick any of them with a quick answer, and then we go for lunch. Well, I guess you must be tired, Christian.
Well, I can continue for a very long time, no problem. So the question of Michael Ammann, is there an EU coordination organization of managing this transfer or transition? Because if everybody invests in cheap PV, then we will have the biggest mismatch between winter and summer. So yes, there are organizations that look into it. There is Nexus E, so it's a European organization of the network transmission system operators. So for example, in France, you have RTE, in Switzerland, you have Swissgrid, in Germany, you have NBW and the others. So you have all these transmission system operators that are responsible also for the grid stability, and they are working together in this organization, Nexus E. And they are coming up, for example, with these 10-year network development plans, where they also have scenarios to look into, will this actually work? So they're doing similar simulations or scenario analysis as I was showing today. And they should come up with scenarios that do work. And it's interesting, if you look at whole Europe, this mismatch in PV is actually offset by a mismatch in wind, where we produce more wind in winter than in summer. So if you take all together, it doesn't look too bad. If you would go country by country, it would be very challenging and maybe not possible. So Yes, there's NextEro, and there's also ACER, the organization of the energy regulators, that is also looking into this. So ACER and NextEro would be the two organizations. And then the next question, what would be the key differences between green energy or renewable energy and sustainable energy? Very good. I mean, we have a very good question. We have this discussion in Europe at the moment. I mean, at the end, I would say it's almost a societal question. I mean, what you can do life cycle analysis of these different technologies. And this is, for example, something that the Paul Scherrer Institute or EMPA are doing, but also at ETH. And there you see differences. And if you look at these at only greenhouse gas emissions, then it's clear. I mean, nuclear power has very little CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour produced. But then, of course, if you take risks into account, then it might be a different equation. This is not a question that we can solve from the technology's point of view. It really needs society to discuss this. And at the end, it's a political discussion of what we want to do there. But obviously, it's very important to do life cycle analysis to really understand what are all the different impacts. And for example, also with green or blue hydrogen, this is an important thing that needs to be done to really understand all these different impacts. Noradine is asking, looking at water scarce countries and given the energy water dependencies, can we add water production technologies, water pumping, desalination treatment into the Nexus E model? What is considered as open source? Okay. So first question, it definitely could. We don't do it at the moment, but it definitely could, especially if you do it at the demand level. And about the open source, we will put Nexus E open source in the coming month. We actually have a project at the moment, so we will do it. The question is how quick can we do it? All the publications are open, so you can also find all the descriptions there. But I have to warn you, I mean, Nexus E is quite a complex platform. It's not something that you can just plug in somewhere and then add change a few numbers and then run it again. So it's quite complex. It's running on our supercomputers, taking a couple of days to actually solve. So it's quite a huge setup, but it will be open source, yes. And the last question by Olivier Villa. We are going to net zero by 2050. Do you know if anyone has been able to make a scenario with only PV and wind and hydropower? If no, then why don't we just all admit that nuclear will have to play a role also in the future? Hydrogen is great, but it also needs electricity a lot, actually. We can't wait for nuclear fusion to arrive. We need to work with the tech we have now. So I fully agree with the last sentence. We have to work with the technology that we have now. In Switzerland, we decided to keep nuclear as long as it's deemed safe. And other countries have other decisions. Germany, they exit. So, I mean, you can build the scenarios with only PV and with hydropower. The question is, as always, like, how expensive is it? And to be very pragmatic, I mean, just having nuclear power as it is today and keep it running as long as it's safe and also economically viable, because I mean, the first nuclear power station in Switzerland that went offline didn't go offline because of security issues, but because of economical considerations. As long as this is the case, then yeah, again, at the end, it's a societal question if you want them or not. But again, we could continue very long on this question.
All right, so Christian and everybody, I think that has been our record. So usually we try to end it really on time, but Mr. Schaffner, Christian, thanks a lot. And I wish you good luck and good research results. We depend on you. And we'll be checking up from time to time to see where you're at. And we hope to keep a close contact with ETH as well in what we are doing. And so once again, Christian, please look at the comments, and there's a lot of compliments for what you have been done today. And well, so to everybody, enjoy your lunch. Thanks a lot for having been here. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks a lot.